Go. All right. So, good morning, Dave. So nice to have you join us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come visit our little humble group.
Happy to be here, Roger. Thank you.
Yeah. I was telling everybody I read your book about a year ago when I first heard about it. I have it in digital format on my tablet to refamiliarize myself with it. But it was a wonderful book. I can relate a lot to some of the things that you dealt with your mom and such. So you speak about in your book your journey. It's so moving, and I was pleasantly surprised that the book isn't really about your journey with Parkinson's. It's really about your being your caregiver for your mom, and you talk about how your relationship with your mom changed and evolved as you contended with the challenges of caregiving. What made you choose to write about that topic?
Yeah, it's a great question, Roger. Thank you. I spent my life as a journalist, which is maybe another way of saying I spent a lot of my life trying to tell stories. And so I was in a position where during that time with my mom, for me, writing has always been a way of also trying to understand things. And so I've kept a journal a lot of my adult life, and I kept a pretty detailed journey during the time I cared for my mom. And I decided after she passed away that I really did want to try to turn this into something more. I'd never written a book before. I'd made a lot of films and done a lot of broadcast interviews and TV and radio reports, but I'd never written a book. And I just felt like one of the curiosities about the caregiving experience, I think, is that even though it's a universal experience, according to AARP, there are 54 million family caregivers in the United States right now, mostly caring for someone old. It's not talked about very much. It's this, I feel like we face a caregiving crisis, and yet it's a quiet crisis. It's not one that's discussed commonly. It's not, we'd rather kind of avoid it, honestly, at our dinner table or in the halls of Congress. And so I really wanted to try to write a story about that experience, try to make it as candid and honest as I could, as a way of both understanding that experience myself, but hopefully providing a story that others could connect to who are also going through that same experience.
Hmm. Well, in the book, you mentioned the rewards and challenges, the sorrows, the sadness, and the joy. How did your experience living with Parkinson's change that with your rewards and challenges caring for your mom? What were the positives and negatives that you dealt with?
Yeah, I know for a lot of people, maybe, and some of you, I'm sure as well, it seems like kind of a head scratcher, right? I'm diagnosed with Parkinson's in my mid 50s, and a couple of years later, I decide to move in and care for my mom. It seems a little backwards almost, and all I can really say is that I think, like probably everyone here, part of what you feel when you're diagnosed with Parkinson's is you still want to be able to do things. You still want to feel like you can do things. And this was something I felt like I could, in fact, do. My mom and I had a special relationship. I was at a point in my life where, while I was still working hard, I had a lot of flexibility to my work. I had a significant person in my life, the woman who would later become my wife, but we weren't married at the time. I just felt like it was something I could do. But it was also because, in a way, it was really part of my life story. Parkinson's was. My late father had Parkinson's disease. My late older brother had Parkinson's disease. And, and so for me, the idea, and I had watched how my mom had cared for my dad during his late difficult years with Parkinson's. And I felt like in a way, my being able to come back and help my mom was sort of a way of bringing my family story full circle, because it gave me, in many ways, a greater understanding of my father and also of how my mom had cared for him. Um, and we all know how varied Parkinson's is, that it's an incredibly idiosyncratic disease. I'm sure you've all heard the old saying that if you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, because we're all so different. I got really lucky. I continued to do really well. I've had a much easier path with Parkinson's than either my father or my brother. Um, but I discovered that caregiving for me actually was more challenging than Parkinson's. And so for me, that time as a caregiver was immensely challenging, but in some ways it also, I think, was helpful to me as a person living with Parkinson's, because I was able to continue to work. I was able to care for my mom. I learned a lot about what I needed to do to take care of myself during that time. It's not maybe what you would expect to have happen, but that was true for my experience.
Hmm. Well, what I loved about the book is it really captures you had such a close relationship with your mom, but you also talk about the sense of responsibility and connection that you wanted not just to celebrate, but you really wanted to deepen that. And in the book, you mentioned that you were kind of forced into the process of caregiving to contend with attributes of your own personality that weren't always attractive, and I can relate to that with my mother. And there are things in that emotional journey that you didn't anticipate. Can you talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I sometimes joke that if you're looking for a way to improve your character, caregiving is about as good a way as I can think of, because it does bring you face to face with your strengths and your weaknesses. It has a way of kind of, you know, piercing your vulnerabilities like a heat-seeking missile. And I think that's particularly, for me, it was particularly true in caring someone with progressive dementia. At the time I moved in with my mom, she was still very sharp at age 95.
Wow.
But her, um, but over time that changed, not surprisingly. That changed, and she became someone with dementia. And so I'll tell you some of my shortcomings. One of mine, for example, is I'm someone who likes to be in charge. Well, any of you who are involved in caregiving or have been know that, you know, when you're a caregiver, you are really like not in charge. I'm someone who likes to be right. Um, and not only that, I like, you know, explaining to you why I'm right. Also, an entirely worthless attribute if you're taking care of someone with dementia. So it brought me face to face with things that weren't great about my personality. It sharpened my awareness of those things. I never would have dreamed I would have gotten so frustrated as I sometimes would. I never would have dreamed I would have become as angry as I sometimes did. It's it's piercingly um, it's just a piercing experience. And it opens you, it peels back your surface vulnerabilities so that you're kind of revealed for who you are. And hopefully you have a chance to learn something from that in a way that I hope I did. But it was simultaneously the hardest experience of my life and also one of the most beautiful, because, and I think that's the nature of caregiving, Roger. It's as you said, it puts you experience love and loss, you know, anger and joy, beauty and great challenge and difficulty. And often you experience all of those things on the same day. It puts you right at the center, I think, of life. You know, in some ways, I always felt so like I was dealing with such intense, personal, vulnerable moments. You know, sometimes people say, well, caring for someone old is a bit like caring for someone like a young child. And there is some truth to that. But the comparison I always make to people is, yeah, right. If you've been a parent, changing your child's diaper, no big deal. Changing your mom's diaper or your
Mhm.
spouse's, not exactly the same experience. So it's it's everything. Caregiving, I think, includes all of life's realities in a single experience. And we're not very well prepared for that in this country. We're not very well prepared as adults for that in this country. I had wonderful help from, and maybe we can talk about this later, from professional caregivers during the day so that I could continue to work. My job as a caregiver was nighttime and weekends. But not all caregivers were as lucky as I was, and we're not prepared in this country to really pay professional caregivers what they deserve. So we have so many challenges, and I think caregiving puts right in the crosshairs so much of the challenges we face in this country as an aging country, which is what we are, that we have yet to fully deal with.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, like you said. You said that one of caregiving is more difficult, but ultimately rewarding challenges to recognize the truth that lies below what is said and try to place yourself inside the other person's reality and then look outward onto what must be an unfamiliar and unsettling new terrain for them. Can you talk a little bit more about what that meant?
Yeah. Well, if you've been with someone or love someone who has dementia, they will often say things that don't on the surface seem to be true. Um, my mom would say things like that she was a Rhodes Scholar. Well, that wasn't true. Or she would say things that just or wouldn't make any sense. And that can get really challenging and frustrating. And it took me a long time to realize that the phrase, "Mom, that's not right," or "Mom, don't you remember?" is basically worthless. And then I think the challenge is to try to find what is this person really trying to say? In the case of my mom saying she was a Rhodes Scholar, I think it probably had to do with like she was a really smart woman. She was the valedictorian of her class, both in high school and college. And I think she wanted people to still know she was a really smart person, even in what was becoming a more less cognitively sharp place. I'll tell you a quick story. One day, when she was well past 100, I walked into her room and she looked at me and said, "David, I know that you were married to someone else before you were married to me." Now, I since learned it's not uncommon for someone with dementia, for someone else, for a husband to become a son, or a son to become a husband, or a wife to become a daughter. All of that sort of conflating of family relations can happen. And all I could think of to say at the moment was, "Mom, I am not your husband. I'm your son." And it didn't register with her. It took me a long time to kind of understand that what that maybe meant. And here's what I, in the end, came to believe. My mom was someone who loved men. She loved men, adored my dad. But my dad had been dead for over 20 years, and she no longer remembered him. But that didn't mean that she still didn't like men. Didn't mean that she wouldn't like to still have a husband. I remember telling her once when our hospice nurse was coming to visit, who was fortunately a male. And I said, "Well, Chris will be here soon." And my mom's response was, "Great, I'll take him." So, that's who she was. And I think in her view, um, I was available. So, I'll take him. So I think that's what I mean by trying to understand the truth behind someone's words. It's trying to understand that they're looking out maybe in this strange, uncertain world where who they have always been isn't quite right anymore. And I think people often with dementia know that and express that in ways that may seem totally off and wrong. But if we can try at least understand something about the truth behind their words, I think that's what we're called to do if we can. And I failed at that for a long time before I began to really try to understand that in a keener way.
Yeah, one of the examples you mentioned in the book is you came home from work and your mom said, I was left in the bathroom for hours and hours. And you had to kind of ferret out what was real, what really happened. Because you wanted to address what your mom was talking about, but you also wanted to know what really happened.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for raising that. I was just flabbergasted because I knew that couldn't possibly have happened, but I didn't want to be dismissive. And so eventually, next day or so, I talked to the caregiver who had been with her during that time. And she just laughed and said, yeah, I helped Adelaide into the bathroom. That was my mom's name, and helped her sit on the toilet. And then I left to give her some privacy. I came back a few minutes later and she'd fallen asleep. And so I just decided to let her be there for a while. And then, 10, 15 minutes later, whatever, I came back and woke her up. So if you think about it from my mom's point of view, I mean, from our point of view, she wasn't left alone for hours and hours. But if you can think about, my mom was sitting there. She didn't really know what had happened. All of a sudden, she's alert, and you know how you can wake up in the middle of the night and think that you've been asleep for hours and hours, and it's been 10 minutes. So it's that kind of thing, and I think that can happen a lot, and it's up to us, I think, to be respectful of that and to pay attention, not so much to that person's words, but to that person's heart, and to always remember. I believe my mom was Adelaide Iverson always. It just became expressed in a different way.
Mm. You mentioned in the book too that you were really blessed to have incredible professional care providers working with you. Can you talk a little bit about what they brought to their work and their relationship with your mom and how it was more than just a paycheck for them?
Yeah. Again, I was incredibly fortunate with that. And I wound up getting better over time with kind of having a sixth sense about who would be right and who would not be, because caregivers can come and go. They have their own lives. I had a wonderful caregiver at the beginning of my time during the day with my mom. And then 6 months in, she got pregnant and said, sorry, got to go. And I remember being like terrified, like, what do I do now? Um, but in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'd grown up and because I'd moved back to my childhood home, it was the only home my parents had ever had together. In the San Francisco Bay Area, um, the many of the caregivers are immigrant Americans, um, and many are almost all are women of color. So I had women from uh, Tonga, from Fiji, from Nicaragua, um, and they, I think, all grew up. And this is a big generalization, I know, but we would talk about this. I think many of them grew up in a culture where taking care of the old was just part of life, part of life's bargain. And I remember talking with one in particular about her saying, when I first came to this country, I couldn't figure out, like, why are you putting people in these, you know, in these nursing homes? Like, why aren't you taking care of them at home? And they were incredible. They were incredible people, all immigrant Americans, all women of color, all women for whom English was a second or third language. And they taught me so much, and they had such skill. The skill to recognize, we got to rotate your mom some in the hospital bed, because if we don't, there's going to be a bed sore in this particular place. Or just their ability to cleanse her and brush her hair and talk with her, um, with such love and such compassion and such tenderness, um, and to be so damn cheerful all the time, more than I was able to be. Um, they taught me that caregiving is basically an act of love that has to be renewed every day. You don't get a day away off from that. And I will be grateful for them for the rest of my life, for all that they gave and all that they taught me.
Mm. And you really talk about the story of these women and how they became very special to you and your mom. And uh, your book has a message and a story of these women that we really can't devalue or forget the importance of their role in society and how that importance of that affects the fabric of all of our lives. You mentioned a little bit at the beginning about where we are as a nation when it comes to caregiving. Can you talk a little bit more about that, the importance of that?
Yeah, well, my favorite statistic about aging in America is that someone turns 65 in this country every 8 seconds.
Wow.
So that means that by this time tomorrow, almost 12 noon on Wednesday, August 28th or whatever it will be, there will be 11,000 more 65-year-olds in the United States than there are right now. So, and in the state of Maine, where I am, has the oldest demographics of any state in the country.
Hmm.
So this is a great and huge coming challenge. And I don't think we're going to be able to contend with that unless we honor the people we need who perform that work. And in this country, we haven't done a very good job of that. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average hourly wage for a home health care worker in 2022 was $14 an hour.
Hmm.
So that's less than $30,000 a year. Doesn't get you too far. Means that a significant percentage of caregivers live below the poverty line. So, you know, we we need that. And as we all know, right, there's no issue more fraught in this country than immigration, right? And our immigration system is broken. That's the truth. Whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent, there's much work that needs to be done. But my great hope is that as we try to solve that problem, we remember who we are as a people, and we remember who we need. And that while, of course, we want skilled immigrants coming to this country, skill doesn't just have to mean those with technological skills,
Hmm.
or engineering skills, or whatever it happens to be. It also means people who have the skillful touch, who have compassion, who care about the old, who provide the care that we so desperately need. We need that, and we need to honor that. And we have a long ways to go. And I think it's up to those of us who feel this way to try to advocate for that change and to bring attention to that issue, because it is in the best sense, in all of our best interests, that we act that way, and that we provide for not only those who need care, but those who provide care.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know when my mom was alive and we were living in Connecticut, if we hadn't had some of the care programs that Connecticut offered, it would have been a real impossibility for me to keep my wife to work as it was to, pay the bills. So I was very fortunate that we had some really good programs and some people that my mom, became beloved to them. So I agree with you. That's definitely something we got to talk about. Just shifting gears a little bit, in the book you speak about the role of grief and grieving throughout the entire process of caregiving. How did you personally cope with that type of grief that you probably never experienced before?
I think that one of the many things you learn in an experience like this is to, and this sounds like a cliche, but it is to really value each moment, and to understand that things might feel really challenging right now, but actually in time, you'll look back at that as the good old days, because things will have become more challenging.
Mm.
So to treasure those beautiful moments when they do occur. Um, my mom was someone who, even as she became less cognitively able, could say the most astonishing things sometimes. She'd never been a poetic person, but she would sometimes say something that was just like so remarkable that I would just treasure and hold on to that the best I could. So, one day I was trying to show her pictures of my granddaughter and some of her other grandchildren on my laptop. And we were looking at them, and then the laptop, something failed on the laptop, and the screen went black. And she kept staring at it for the longest time. And then she said, "It's like looking into a dark river and not being able to see the fish." Like, where did that come from? So I think if we can treasure those moments, it helps in this long journey of loss, because the trajectory of this experience is that it doesn't often get a lot better. You're on kind of a trajectory that's only kind of going in one direction. You have to be aware of that. Know that even if you think you've got it all figured out and you've got the best care system ever, that by like tomorrow, that won't be true anymore. You have to realize that, but at the same time also cherish these special moments, these intimate moments that you never would have had if you weren't present to that person in that moment.
That's a good way to look at it. We have our best friends in Connecticut. He's 70 and his wife's 68, and she was diagnosed with aphasia about a year ago, but that's progressed to prefrontal dementia. And last time I talked to him on the phone, he says the Sue is dead. She's gone. Like, she can't talk anymore. He has to change her diapers, has to do everything, and he's struggling to find the gem of beauty in all of that mess. But do you feel like writing the book was a part of how you processed the whole experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I felt like I had learned a lot, that had been this very incredibly life-changing and meaningful life experience. But I wanted to, and I believe my mom was an extraordinary character, and I thought it could be a good story. And everyone thinks they have a good story, which I also recognize. But I just thought that maybe I could try to tell this story in a way that would also help it become more clear to me. And that did happen through writing it. But that it would be something that would be of use potentially to others who were going through that experience. But yeah, for me, it was a way of processing, and a way of coming to greater clarity about what it had meant, what I had learned from it, and who I hoped I could still become.
What did you learn from the process about receiving care for yourself, though, which is interesting?
Yeah, I was just talking about this with some good friends earlier today, actually, that you'd think, having gone through this experience, that my wife and I would now have had these very well-developed plans for our care plans for ourselves. And I would have had this lengthy conversation with my 45-year-old daughter about, this topic, and so on. And that's actually not true. We've talked about it, but have I got it all figured out and a plan for how to deal with everything? No, I don't. I mean, the power of denial when it comes to this reality is extraordinary. And I'm probably furthered in that denial by the fact that I'm still doing well with my Parkinson's path. And that probably allows me to fool myself to a degree. The one thing I have done, and I haven't finalized it, is to write a letter to my loved ones, explaining what I view as what quality of life means to me. That euphemism and ubiquitous phrase. What does that mean, quality of life? Well, I've tried to write down precisely what that means to me. That it means being able to spend time with my grandchildren, to spend time with my wife, to be able to go for a walk in the woods, to be able to go to a Stanford basketball game, because I'm a big fan, to do those things that I really cherish. And if something were to happen to me and I could recover, to be able to still experience some of those things that give me quality of life, then yes, please, resuscitate me, revive me, give me the care that's possible. But if there's no chance that I will experience any of those things, then I really don't want care beyond that. And here's the key sentence. And if 10 years from now, you find me saying something other than that I want to live no matter what, pay no attention to that man. Pay attention to the man who has written this now and is signing this as of this date. I say that because my mom at age 95 would never have wanted to have lived as long as she did, especially the last 3 years of her life when things were so tough. But by the time she got to those last 3 years, she would say, when she could still speak clearly, I don't want to die every day. So you wind up thinking, who do I honor here? The woman I have always known, who had absolutely would not have wanted this, and the woman who now weighs maybe 80 pounds and is in a hospital bed, but who can still say, I don't want to die. I think we have to acknowledge that no matter how much we think we know what we want, that's a fallible and changeable belief. So that's not a very good or thorough or complete answer to your question, Roger, but that's the one thing that I think I know and that I've tried to articulate. Now, have I given that letter to my daughter? No, I have not. So I have a ways to go still.
Yeah, well, one thing that I know that this month is National Make Your Will Month, and we've been talking about that, the importance of making your wishes known in advance. That's so important.
And
One of the
and
challenge. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
just to interject, sorry, not everything can be put in a will or a trust. Not everything can be put in an advanced healthcare directive or a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. We have forms, and they're great, but I think there's some things that take another form. Maybe you record a conversation with your wife or daughter. I think there are other ways to do this so that in another way, Roger, this gets to my what I was trying to say before about the truth behind the words. It's the beauty sometimes of the spoken word. There's emotion and truth to that you can sense and feel, So anyway, I just think that we have to come at this in a creative way, in a way.
Yeah, you mentioned that one of the challenges of caregiving is really finding that balance along the spectrum of the future and planning ahead and thinking ahead. So, how did you manage that challenge with your mom? How did you navigate that?
Navigate's the right word, because I one thing I write in the book is that it's caregiving. When you set out on caregiving, you're a bit like one of those ancient explorers going out and it's those old maps that say that way dragons be. There's uncertainty out there, but you don't know really where it is, and it's often foggy. You can't see the horizon, you can't see certain landmarks. So navigating, I think, is exactly the right word. And navigate means the ability to shift directions, because it is not a through line. That's not how caregiving works. There are twists and turns and unexpected things that happen. And so you have to be nimble, I think. You have to be able to adjust, because I make the comparison that, it's a bit like being a jazz musician. There's a certain call and response to it. There's that you have to be responsive to and adjust as you go. And I think you have to have people you can lean on. I could lean on my daughter, on the woman who would become my wife. I could lean on my two brothers who were both living at the time. One still is, who weren't able to be present in the way of helping with caregiving that much, but who loved me and so appreciated what I was trying to do. all of that's really important. I have a dear friend who was caring for her husband with dementia. We would talk on the phone because we understood each other's circumstance.
Mm.
I often say it's like, you don't have to, with that kind of person, you don't have to start with the table of contents. You can start on page 147 because they know what you're going through. I think that's a key part to navigating this experience too. It's so hard to do if you're trying to fly solo.
Yeah, but there were still some moments that with your mom that were very beautiful, like the experience when you were in the car together. Maybe you could share that story. That really touched me when I read that.
Oh, absolutely. There were so many beautiful moments. And yeah, if we have time, Roger, I'd love to read a passage or two from the
Yes,
book
please. We'd love that.
uh, because they speak, I think, to what you're saying. Okay, well, would you like me to do that?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
That's all my questions. I'm going to open up for questions after your excerpt, or you read some of your book. And I encourage everybody, if you haven't had a chance to read the book, you can pick it up at the library, both in there it is, Winter Stars. You can pick it up here in Sarasota, anyways. You can pick it up both in physical form, and I read it digitally on Cloud Library,
You can get it through our old friend Amazon, but any bookstore,
Amazon.
if you want to support your favorite local bookstore, you can just ask them. And if they don't have it on the shelf, and they probably won't, they'll order it for you and have it to you shortly. And by the way, all the proceeds, all the royalties from the book go to benefit three wonderful organizations, two of which I bet you know, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, Dance for PD or Dance for Parkinson's, which is a fabulous
Oh, yeah, David Leventhal, incredible.
David Leventhal is one of the world's best human beings.
He
Uh,
is.
and another that you won't know, it's a smaller elder care organization in the San Francisco Bay Area called Avenidas. So,
Well,
um,
that's wonderful
great.
to
Well,
tell us.
this is a passage from an experience I had with my mom toward the end of her life. And it was a drive we took to the ocean. And it was, my mom it was a drive we'd taken since I'd been a little boy, the same exact route to what was the beach that we always went to in that part of California. So I'll read part of this short
Thank you.
passage. My mom had always loved the ocean. We'd taken the same drive as a family for 60 years, over La Honda Road and heading towards Highway 1. When I was a kid, we'd always compete to see who could spot the ocean first. Today, as we approached the old general store, the ocean came into view a mile or so away. My mom wasn't able to see it, so I said, Mom, I've got to keep my eyes on the road, so let me know when you see the ocean. It wasn't until we got about 100 feet from the water that she exclaimed, I see it, and a wide smile creased her face. We were at the point when I wanted us both to savor these moments, precisely because I knew they wouldn't last. That moments can't be banked or reclaimed later when you need a good moment credit. But as we drove along the water on this beautiful spring day, I tried to remember to do better, to just be in the scene I was in, to take in the joy I saw on her face, precisely because it would only be experienced then. For her, there wouldn't be a later memory, a later savoring. And I tried to remember that moments are to be treasured because they do not last. Like a cloud pushed by the wind, moments part as they become. Today, we're driving south from San Gregorio along Highway 1. There are prettier spots on the coast road, but this is imbued with so much memory. As always, we pulled to a stop at Pescadero State Beach, our ocean destination for the past 60 years. Nobody in my family knows why this is true. Bean Hollow, a few miles further south, is prettier. Pomponio, a few miles to the north, affords longer walks along the cliffs. But Pescadero is home. We pulled into the parking lot just south of the beach because it offers the best view. We sat and watched, and we were quiet. As we parked there, I happened to notice that the children's book, The Little Engine That Could, was on the back seat. I'd recently purchased one of those classic editions to read to my then 3-year-old granddaughter. I don't know why, but I asked my mom if she wanted me to read it to her, and she said yes. Maybe she just liked the title because she was someone who also thought she always could and was deeply annoyed when events transpired to obstruct her daily mission, to get up in the morning, to do what needs to be done for the good of family and the good of society. For my mom, getting old didn't include giving herself a pass. Accepting limitations was not within her DNA. It was her greatest strength, and now sometimes the source of her greatest pain, a pain that she would sometimes inflict on others. But in that moment, I read her a story, and together we took in the sound of the words, the wind, and the waves. Me. It's pretty out here today, isn't it, Mom? Adelaide. I like what's covering me. Me. Do you mean your blanket? Adelaide. I mean the sky.
Mm. I love that section. That's such a, I'm gonna have to read it again now. Thanks for so much for sharing that, David. We really appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to questions now. So the first person is Janet Parmenter. If you'd like to start off and ask a question to Dave.
Okay. Stop now. Okay. Yes, Dave, I'm blind, and I was wondering if your book is on any facilities for like the National Library for the Blind at Library of Congress or any talking book.
Yeah, thank you. It is available. There's an audio version of the book, which and I narrate it. So it is available through Audible, which you can get on Amazon. So there is an audio book version of the book. It was important to me to do that, not only for the reason you described, to have it be available, but also because I spent a lot of my life. I spent a lot of my life on radio. And so I think a good story told through the spoken word is sometimes a more intimate way of experiencing it. So thank you very much for raising that question. And I hope you'll be able to find it and access it that way.
Thank
All right. Thank you. Edie, let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned that, caregiving can involve a lot of frustration. I was my mother's caregiver, and there were times when it was tough. Can you talk a little bit about coping skills?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I didn't always cope well. I got angry more often than I'd like to admit. And it's one of the things I admired so much about my caregivers, because I watched them sometimes, because my mom could be tough. She could be a tough cookie. And they would go in and Adelaide would say something not very kind, and they just kind of let it roll off their back and come back in the room 5 minutes later, ready for the next moment. I think that takes incredible strength and great wisdom and compassion. But part of what helped me over time was experiencing and beginning to understand my own weakness. So, I remember one time when I got furious with my mom for reasons I cannot remember. But I yelled at her and she started to cry. And do you know what I said? I said, go ahead and cry. And then I stomped out of the room like a teenager. And I remember slamming the door and going to the adjoining garage. And I remember it was raining and I could hear the rain falling on the roof. And I remember just standing there and feeling like, who am I? Who am I becoming? And then finally kind of walking back into the kitchen, sitting down beside my mom. And I was the one who burst into tears. And she just reached out her hand and looked at me and said, don't cry, David. Don't cry. So I guess for me, experiencing tears helped me begin to cope, helped me realize how tough this was for all of us, helped me appreciate my mom in new ways. But I also was so blessed, and that is the right word, blessed, to have the caregiving support that I could, so that I could go to work, so that I could go for a walk. I took up long distance running when I was a caregiver, for the time that it gave me alone, but also because I knew the fitness it would bring me was crucial to my ability to continue to function well with Parkinson's. You know, being loved helped me cope. I knew my mom loved me. I knew she trusted me. And that was immensely valuable when I had to make some tougher decisions about her care, to know that she trusted me. But, you know, I was so fortunate in ways so many people aren't, to have that arsenal of support and kindness and love supporting me. And I just feel we have to do our best in this country to make sure that good care isn't just for those who have good fortune, you know, and we're a ways from doing that. But I don't think I could have coped if I hadn't been embraced really by all of that kindness and compassion and love.
That's beautifully put. Thank you. Does that answer your question, Edie?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Sue, you had your hand up?
Yeah, Mr. Iverson, thank you. You talked about the blessing of having good caregivers. And I was wondering if you have any opinion on the best way of going, because there's agencies, but sometimes some of the workers aren't trustworthy, or they're not loving, or it's just difficult to find someone. So I just wonder if you had any input on that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Again, I was very, very fortunate, but I did feel like I began to learn some things about that and about interviewing prospective caregivers. And I hired both independently. You know, it was like gold if you got a recommendation from, like, I had a friend who had a caregiver for her father, and her father had passed, and so she said, well, you could try, Mele, she might be available. Well, if you get that kind of recommendation, that's like money in the bank. But of course, you can't always have that. But I did both, through agencies and through through friends, finding people. But what I always tried to pay attention to when I'd have someone come over for an interview, my mom was always present. And at that point, she was still pretty present cognitively as well. I paid attention to how they responded to her, not just to me, that they were focused on her and answering and asking questions of her, letting her ask questions of them. Because that's the relationship that matters. It's between those two individuals. I also, because my mom was incredibly energetic and she was a force of nature, I also watched for someone who could match that. When she was hospitalized once, there was a certified nursing assistant who would come into her room, who I knew as soon as Eileen walked in, like, okay, this is gonna go well. Not because Eileen was necessarily the sweetest person in the world, but because she could deal with my mom, you know, and so I asked Eileen if she wanted an extra part-time job, and she did, and she became in the end our longest serving, most full-time care provider. So I looked for that. But I used to think of it like this. I used to try to imagine after doing an interview, okay, how will I feel when I have to go to work in the morning and this person is about to ring the doorbell and come in? Am I going to feel really glad and happy and so glad that this person is there? Or am I going to be nervous and worried about how the day goes? Because how the day goes isn't just going to affect my mom, it's also going to affect me. And so I think that's a pretty good barometer. And if I felt like, if I had a good sense, like, yeah, I'd be happy to see this person ring the doorbell, then that was, to me, a good indicator that this was probably gonna work out. I had a wonderful caregiver once who had a boisterous laugh, and my mom said to her in the interview, "You laugh too loud," and Ronette just laughed again, you know, and I thought, you're going to be fine. And my mom came to adore her because she was so exuberant. So I think it's more art than science. I think there are advantages to an agency in terms of people being bonded and all of that, in terms of making sure you're not taken advantage of. So I don't mean to go lightly over that part of it. But I do think in the end, it is an intuitive sense of, does this person get the person who's going to be cared for?
Great answer. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have a question for Dave? Or either raise your physical hand or digital hand. I'm just looking around, see if anybody. Oh, Robert Stolt, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, great talk. I thought this was so thoughtful. My father has also dementia, and what I noticed is he's picking up on emotions in the room very, very strongly. So if there's any tension, then that builds up in him and gets basically reflects back to the room.
Wow.
And so it seems to me that a big part of managing the dementia of relatives is not to argue about factoids and logic, you know, what happened and whatever. It's about emotional management, you know, that they're looking for the lead. And so if you're cheerful or at least calm, that helps a lot. And it's not about arguing about this or that. That's not what this is about. It's about stabilizing emotions and making it a cheerful day. So for the person, can you confirm that?
Yeah, that is so wonderfully put. Thank you for offering that. Yeah, I think it gets at a deeper and an important level to what I was trying to say, I think, about the truth behind the words. You're talking about emotional truth and the ability to sense kind of the emotional temperature of the room. And I think respecting that and sensing that in someone who has dementia is incredibly important. And I think your point is so well put, and thank you. It's something I can learn from and think about now in a different way as well. So I think that's a terrific point. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Anybody else have a question that you want to ask Dave while he's here with us? Oops, hold on, sorry. Just make sure I don't miss anybody's hands. No, I guess that's it. Everybody, well, thanks. I want to thank you again on behalf of our support group, Dave, for coming today and for sharing your information about your story, your journey with your mom, and your own personal journey with Parkinson's. And I know all of our group members appreciate you coming, and I know they'll look forward to reading that book now, especially that they've heard more about it. So thank you so much for coming. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Roger, and everyone in the group. It means a lot to be able to talk about this and to hear your questions and observations. And I really appreciate the time that you've given to this subject and have been able to share with me today. So thanks everyone very much.
Okay, I have just one more quick question before I go. Is Janet, you have one more question for Dave before he goes?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Iverson for
Oh.
expressing your feelings, and I look forward to hearing your book. Dealing with frustration. Wow, I can really relate to that, because sometimes we get angry at ourselves for a lack of frustration.
Yeah.
But I look forward to hearing you read the book.
Well,
And thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much, Janet. And yeah, I think, on that coping question that Dee Dee asked, I guess, I think being kind to yourself is a big part of that, because there's no way you won't screw up if you're a caregiver. You just will. and accepting that, learning to laugh at yourself a little bit, and being kind, as you say, is really a crucial attribute to have. So thank you for raising that too.
Well, thank you for those parting words. We really appreciate it. And thanks again for coming, Dave. We're so glad that you were here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Roger.